Warning: the following video contains explicit language which may be offensive to some viewers or inappropriate for children. The content within this video is intended for mature audiences only.
Hello and welcome back. We are continuing our journey down the rabbit hole of rabbits by Terry Miles. This is the novel. I don't know if I've pointed this out before in other videos. We're kind of deep in it now, but this is a standalone. This takes place after the second season of Rabbits. But it's done in such a way that you don't have to have listened to the podcast. You don't have to have a PhD in rabbits to enjoy this novel. And I do recommend either buying the novel in a traditional hard copy or digital copy like we're listening to here and enjoy it for yourself without my commentary. So, without further ado, let's get into this.
But the last time we played Connections was different. My parents had taken me out for pancakes. This time, there were no cards. This time, we were looking for connections in real life.
This is more like what me and my wife play when we go camping or go to state parks and what have you.
Father asked me to look for things that could be related somehow, for any kind of link between two or more things in the restaurant. I hadn't noticed anything that stood out until after we'd eaten and were just about to leave. I pointed out a girl wearing a t-shirt with a horse on the front. It was very similar to a painting of a horse hanging above the door to the kitchen. We followed the girl and her family as they went outside.
Yeah, that can kind of get you arrested in this day and age.
And got into their car. As we were standing outside the restaurant, a bus pulled up and stopped. There was an ad on the side of the bus for a group of artists at the Fry Art Museum. The ad featured a horse. And just like the girl's t-shirt and the painting above the kitchen door, the horse was rearing up on its back legs. My mother grabbed my hand, and we...
Yeah, that's like I said, that's kind of the stuff that it's fun to play. You ought to try it sometime. And like I said, me and my wife have been doing that for years, long before I discovered the Rabbits podcast. It's just something we did to pass time. Matter of fact, the first time we ever went to a state park, we had left Huntsville. We were living in apartments at the time. And we went from Huntsville to visit my parents in Carper's Cove. Then from there, the place we were going to was, I want to say, just north. It was, I want to say it was just north. I can't remember which state park it was. We've been to so many now. Just north of Waco. And to pass the time, we started doing that on the road. Then we did it once we got to the park. And it was, like I said, it's an interesting game. I just wonder how much that they base the stuff for this novel that Terry Miles may have actually done some variants of in real life.
We ran for the bus. We didn't make it. My parents had a brief conversation. Then we got into the car and drove to the Fry Art Museum. We entered the museum, and my parents took me straight to the painting of the rearing horse that had been featured on the side of the bus. There was something in the title and catalog number of the painting that led my parents to drive us to a park.
There we go. They were mixing in the path cards.
I can't remember exactly which park, but I remember seeing a bust of a man's head attached to a small fountain and some kind of outdoor performance stage. While my parents were excitedly working out something related to the numbers they'd found connected to that painting, I wandered off.
Uh-oh. That's never good.
They found me a minute or so later, screaming my lungs out. I'd stumbled onto a large concrete chessboard. It was protected from the elements by a large metal roof and surrounded by 4 stone benches. I remember stepping up onto the board and playing an imaginary game of chess.
Now, there's a pub-themed club in Houston that has the giant chessboard on it, and they have the pieces that, they're up about, I want to say like the king is probably about 42 inches, the queen's about the same height, pawns are about 36 inches, and like your knights, your bishops, and your rooks are all between the size of, they're taller than the pawns but shorter than the king and queen. It's just stuff like that's kind of cool. And there's one in Galveston too, off one of the beaches. You have it, then you have the strip, the drive, and then you have the beach. I like giant. I personally have this thing for giant chessboards, and I love playing chess. I suck at it. It's like bowling. I suck at it, but I enjoy it.
I'd recently learned how to play and had become fascinated with the way the pieces moved. I was still too young to be any good, but I loved the rules. And
now, if you really want to have fun, play it on a round chessboard. And it predates the square chessboard that we use now in Western society. It was originally played on a round board, and which makes the knights move, the bishop and the rooks makes their movements make more sense. Google it if you don't believe me, or even if you do, Google it, and it's fascinating the difference between chess on a round board versus a square board.
The seemingly endless possibilities. I imagined the pieces, bishop, pawn, rook, and the rest, clashing in my head as I performed each allotted movement in turn. The giant board became a mental battleground as I strode across the squares, my purposeful footsteps representing the movements of black and white in their fight for supremacy.
There's also the original 1968 Prisoner, Patrick McGowan, has an episode where they play human chess, which is kind of cool. And her descriptions of being in battle and stuff. If you know the premise of The Prisoner, that link in my brain makes more sense. If you don't have, it's not worth going off on a tangent on this video, but Google it. Go to IMDb, 1968, The Prisoner, Patrick McGowan.
While I was taking one of White's pawns with one of Black's knights, however, something happened. A deep panic overwhelmed me, and dark, blurring shapes slowly started seeping into my eyes from the edges of the world. I felt like my peripheral vision had betrayed me somehow. I was suddenly frozen in place. I couldn't move. This is the first time I remember experiencing this feeling.
Yeah, I imagine that would any kind of feeling like that or along those lines, I imagine for a child, well, even an adult. I'm 54 years old, and if something like that hit me, I think I would freak a lot.
Feeling that would overwhelm me again a few years later in that truck with Annie and Emily Connors. A sensation that I would eventually begin referring to as the gray feeling.
That's a good name for it.
The gray feeling usually began with a low, thrumming vibration deep in the pit of my stomach and an itchy tingling right behind my eyes. It would soon take over my upper body with a rush of what felt like fluttering moths in my lungs. Then my limbs would turn heavy and weak, and finally, my mouth would be filled with a thick, fuzzy tingling.
The whole mouth description, that's just kind of, it works for the story and makes it even that much more eerie, but it's hard to imagine it in my brain.
This was all accompanied by an inescapable, low, hollow, metallic humming in my head. This is what happened to me while I was standing on that giant chessboard in the park.
Ooh, yeah, I imagine like that. It kind of reminds me, though, the very first time I ever did mushrooms, and the mushrooms kicked in about 45 minutes after I took them. I was in a group of people at a gathering, a hobby of mine at the time, and when it kicked in, yeah, that you get that whole. That's what it kind of reminds me of. Psilocybin kicking in on you, but that was 30 years ago now.
This and more. I had the sudden feeling that I was somewhere else. And wherever I was, I wasn't alone. Something was there with me. Something cold.
Something in the dark. That does sound like, for me anyhow, I relate it to my very first psilocybin experience.
I remember being terrified to look up into the sky because I knew that I'd be able to see whatever it was. And I understood that if I could see it, it would be able to see me. Then I felt it coming, speeding toward me from somewhere way up in the dark clouds.
Now, I have to be honest. When the people I was with realized what was going on, they immediately did what they needed to do to calm things, to get everything back on track, so you didn't have a bad experience. But that initial, even though you're prepared for it, it hits you. I can imagine for her, being a little kid, no known drugs being at play here, and as something like that hits, that had to be terrifying as hell.
That's when I lost control of my bladder and screamed. My parents came running and took me home immediately. In bed later that night, I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. I'd been rereading The Lord of the Rings for the third time, and something about that thing I'd felt coming out of the darkness reminded me of the Eye of Sauron.
See, being a science fiction reader, science fiction that is more my thing. I've read Lord of the Rings, and I get the connection, and I can imagine for a child who's read that, especially a child of advanced intelligence, that something like that happens. That would be terrifying.
Seeing Frodo when he'd put on the ring. I remembered feeling completely naked and exposed, like I was waiting there for something terrifying to arrive from another world.
And we'll go ahead and leave this here. Pick up in the next video. This is a pretty exciting part of the book we're getting into. So until next time, be a good human, be good to other humans. Peace.
Hey, it's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?